I'm very dedicated. I mean, I came in because Jeannie asked me to, but really, I understand. This is like, I don't know.
Can I put this down? Yeah. You have to at least talk into so I can hear that. Yeah.
All right, here we go. We're going to have David Garcia give us a little bit more information on OPA, and then we'll get into our USDA session.
Hi, everyone. So you already know me. I'm David Garcia. I'm the attorney for the OPA. So for all you guys who don't know, the OPA is a long-standing organization that was founded by some agriculturalists back in the day, and then it went dormant for a while. It was restarted in 2018. And part of the focus of the OPA has been since it's been reborn, has been the fact that there's not enough, there hasn't been a lawyer, and there isn't a pushback against the government when necessary by attorneys. And so that's why I joined the OPA to be the OPA attorney. And it's why, since I've been doing the OPA, my focus has been litigation, federal level litigation against the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And also I attend all the CITES meetings, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, as an OPA representative to promote the interest of breeders. And my long-term goal is to promote the international trade of birds, because obviously we're all aware of the problems with limited bloodlines. So the most recent litigation I'm doing with Pat Burke and the Lineage Parakeet Society is pushing back against the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the fact that they haven't amended the Wild Bird Conservation Act import list for 30 years, and that there's no reason that we can import Gen Day conures but not green form linneys from Europe, when probably more green form linneys are being bred in Europe than are Gen Days being bred in Europe. So that's part of what I've been doing. I'm also up here to apologize a little bit, because since COVID started, I've been continuing my activities as the OPA attorney, but we haven't talked about it much. We haven't posted enough for you guys to know what's going on, and we haven't had an OPA event. So really the announcement I'm making is for everyone here is that a lot of our board members are, the old stalwarts of agriculture, but some of them want to retire, and honestly, I think we need some younger blood. So I'm looking for, the OPA is looking for people who'd be interested in standing for OPA board positions. That we're the first step in getting this going again is putting a fresh board on there, so we can then do fresh officers to do more stuff. Also, I am clearly been very much involved in the USDA stuff. I have more than enough money at the moment, but we could always use a little bit more. So, if there's anyone who wants to make a donation to the OPA or renew their OPA membership, please do. Like I said in my speech, it'll be benefits to you if you ever have a problem with the USDA, because it's I'll take that into consideration. But opabirds.org, please, if anyone wants to make a donation, renew their membership. And please, if anyone in this room or anyone knows anyone else who's interested in an OPA board position, please reach out to me or Sarah, who's also helping me with stuff, so that we can hopefully put an election together in January, not August. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say. I just wanted to give everybody a little update on OPA, and hopefully we'll have a convention for you guys next year. So thank you.
I'm with you. It's on its way. Okay, so if we can go ahead and get our USDA folks up here, we'll steal some chairs from the front.
Thank you.
Just 4 is all we need.
So we go. All right. Awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, in case another one of you guys.
Just replicate.
Okay. So we had some great feedback from our first session on Thursday, and a lot of requests for an additional opportunity to talk to USDA and get some more of our questions answered. And I know Cody expressed a desire also to clarify some things that we didn't have a chance to cover in our last session. So first off, I'm going to hand the mic over to Cody, and we're going to try, hopefully we'll see how it goes, to make this a little more structured. I think you have some specific topics you want to go on, and we'll try to keep the questions kind of on topic, in other words. We all know how these Q&As go, so we'll see how it goes. Here we go.
Thanks, Steve. So yes, I do have just a couple of kind of main topics I want to go over, but there is also whatever you need to ask, go ahead and ask. The first kind of main topic that we didn't really touch on the other day was vet care. And Josie did a great presentation, so this is a great segue into that, is vet care and how does USDA look at vet care and all the implications of that in the inspection process. So I'll just kind of do this is the most important part for the inspection process is vet care. Ask any inspector, that determines such a high value of welfare is, hey, do you have a vet? Do you have a program of vet care? Are you doing daily observations and then reporting abnormal findings to your attending vet? Okay. So every inspector, that is their go-to thing, that they're going to be the highest priority, primary thing they're going to be looking at and evaluating. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the program of vet care. Are you guys familiar at all with that? Have you seen an example of that? I know we have a few people that are licensed. Do you want to go over a little bit about how you developed your program of vet care? And sorry to kind of call you on the spot.
I actually interviewed a lot of vets because hello, I'm Marlene Lopez and with Exotic Tropical Pet World in McAllen, Texas. We did interview a lot of vets because a lot of vets really don't know. I mean, I have birds, I have dogs, I have, in reality, our dogs are the mostly that we get targeted by everybody. And yes, you put me on the spot.
I'm
So
sorry.
I'm like, oh. But yes, it's super easy. My sister's here with us as well, with me as well. And everybody that's scared about having USDA license, it has been the best thing that we've ever had. And we actually get inspected by USDA, by AKC, and we have a lot. I mean, I've actually argued with a lot of attorneys in New York for specific breeds of dogs. So I'm in that business as well. But USDA is the best thing that ever happened because the customer comes and I start telling them we are USDA inspected, inspected by USDA. And yes, they do come out when you never expect them. So as long as all your facilities are clean. Our vets, we have Dr. Hinojosa, and we also have another vet that comes into our store. They do come and inspect your stores. What I ask is if they are familiar with USDA, because some are not, because they're some are not, but I'm blessed that my daughter's becoming a vet as well, so hopefully we'll have her. And she is mega time perfectionist, and she will go by the rules. They do go by the rules. USDA, actually, our inspector, as long as you have your USDA and you put it in a little pamphlet USDA, and he comes and that's the first thing that's gonna ask, let me see your book. And when I see my book, we do sell sugar gliders and we do sell hedgehogs, and that is regulated by USDA. So they need to know where I purchased them. So on birds, I think it's gonna be very easy. Just make sure you guys ask your vet. The inspections, how you feed them, and the form is super easy.
What kind of things are in your program of vet care? I know, like
We have
diet.
the diet. Yeah, we have the diet. We also have for the dogs, actually, because that's what we've done. how the structure on your kennels are, how big your kennels are, the size of your kennels, in what are they? Oh, the exercise program.
Yep.
We have the exercise program. If we take them out every 15 minutes, depending on the breeds of the dogs, and that's one. And also the size of the kennel, the vets, they also ask you to make sure how many times you're feeding them, you know, the feeding, the feeding, the morning feeding, the late feeding, and exercise.
Emergency care.
The medications, emergency care. If he's available 24 hours to call him, which he is, for big time feed. No, I'm just joking.
Medical procedures. Or
Medical procedures. Yes, because if the inspector comes and you have a medication labeled for rider, you know, yak, spring, and shepherd, and you don't have that dog in your facility, that medication shouldn't be with you. That means if you sell a puppy or you sell, that medication should have gone with your puppy. You know, do not leave it out there. And make sure you have a refrigerator too.
Thank you for that. Sorry for calling on the spot, but so you might be asking, hey, so what exactly needs to be in that program of vet kit? Okay, we don't define that. For dogs and cats, we have a few things specifically, but for the other subparts, when I say the other species groups, we say that's between you and your attending vet. And your attending vet should be helping you direct, like, okay, these are the areas I want you to focus on. This is where we need to have kind of written out agreement, whether it be vaccines, what diet, biosecurity, what medical procedures that the vet feels comfortable for you to perform, any emergency situations, breeding, stuff like that. You know, you don't define that. You and your attending vet need to have that agreement. Now, I think, are we going to be? So we do have an example of the form. You're not required to use this form. We just say, hey, this is an example of a form that you can use. To the bottom. Scroll to the bottom. Yeah, there you go. You want to just kind of giving it walk through.
So here is the example. Again, it's kind of overarching. You would set up your most basic information, who you are on the left-hand side, who your attending veterinarian is on the right-hand side. And again, you can establish a frequency in which your veterinarian would be coming to perform some sort of an inspection on the premises at some regularity. That's one of our regulatory requirements. Any sort of notifications, anything clinically they want to put in there, any special notes. And the cool thing is these are all downloadable. They're all PDF fillable forms if that's convenient for you, or you can print them out and do them by hand. Again, so please keep in mind this is for the ones we currently cover. So areas for dogs and cats, like types of vaccine schedules for those types of animals, you know, what's their parasite control, you know, and what are their protocols that you guys are going to follow as license holders. Emergency care, that's a really important one. And that's one of our regulatory requirements too, that we have to have some sort of procedure or protocol in place in case any of your animals need emergency veterinary care, where they're going to go. And of course, when you have it all like nice and organized for yourself, then of course, as a license holder, you know, you already have a plan. You already have everything like set up for yourself. So that's actually quite useful resource to have. And sure. If there is you know, a need for euthanasia, who's going to perform that euthanasia? Many of our license holders are authorized by their veterinarians to do it themselves. It depends on, again, what's the agreement between them, but again, you'll discuss that as well. Let's see. And let's see, so again, for some of our regulated animals, we have other necessary documents that have to be included. Again, like for example, for dogs, they need an exercise plan. For non-human primates, they need an enrichment plan. Again, this doesn't pertain to most folks here, but again, any of those kind of specialty requirements, you know, there's like a quick little, like a little checkbox to see if your veterinarian veterinarian has fulfilled some of those requirements. And then again, it just breaks down for different groups, but again, I'm guessing there'll be something like that for birds.
Yeah, we're definitely looking at making, we're started already doing that. It has to go through the approval process because it is a government form that everyone, the public will have access to. And we have to, because we're kind of requiring information in that form, it has to go through a review system, okay? But we are looking and developing that. So why is the program of vet care important? One, when we come and do an inspection, it allows us to know, hey, you do have an attending vet. We have the contact information. We can call up him or her, say, hey, do you have any concerns? Two, it also then spells out very black and white, what kind of procedures, what are you supposed to be doing with these animals? And it's ensuring that the attending vet has the authority and is carrying out that authority to be able to make sure that your animals are being taken care of appropriate to his or her expectations. So that's why I really want to stress here is we've heard some great, medical procedures that you guys usually do in the breeder world for your animals. It would be best practices here to have that spelled out in the program of vet care. Because if an inspector comes and says, hey, you're doing, providing fluids, sub-Q fluids. Well, is your attending vet okay with that? If it's not spelled out in the program of vet care, then we have to go call your attending vet, and they're all busy people, So this helps to kind of streamline that. Oh, I see this, kind of written contract between you and the attending vet. Here it is. These are the things we're doing. Yep, the diet, everything, vaccines if you are, all of that. Any questions about the program of vet care? Okay.
Does the license be good for 3 years? Is it going to be where the vet has to come out every year or every 6 months, every 3? I mean, what's?
Great question. We don't establish that. There needs to be some frequency. Usually I see is 1 year. Some of it's 6 months, but that's the attending vet to kind of help you navigate what's appropriate for your animals. Depending on the health status, it may be more or less frequent. Yes, you do need a site visit, regularly scheduled site visits for the animal at the facility.
I am retiring, so this probably isn't going to affect me, but I still have birds, I'm still breeding. And I had my vet retired and she's done. And she used to come out to my facility whenever. So I had an issue with a baby bird recently. I called 5 veterinarians. Most of them, oh yeah, we see birds. We do wings and nails. Of course, getting a vet out. Now we're getting a couple of mobile vets. I understood, and I could be wrong, that you said, if you have a dog and cat vet come out and look at your facility, that's acceptable. Okay, this dog and cat vet hasn't got a clue about a subcutaneous. We're doing that. I mean, my vet taught me things 35 years ago that I'm doing. So this vet that I'm supposed to be working with and under hasn't got a clue. So I'm doing things that my vet is not authorizing. How does that work?
So we get this in the mammal world all the time, right? Tiger, non-human primates, do you either of you want to talk about where you have these kind of difficult species to find vet care? What do you guys do? Any experience on that?
So these answers are never cookie cutter. I can't just give you an answer that's going to fit everybody here. So understand that circumstances are different. Where you live, resources available to you, like veterinarians, are different, and there are challenges. And when you speak with your inspector, part of our job is to only regulate and educate, but we're advocates for the animals. So we want you to have a good veterinarian that you're comfortable with. So that's where it's possible sometimes that we may know somebody, or we may know one of our fellow inspectors that has a veterinarian who's got a list of good ones in your area, or they know somebody who is a specialist and would love to, or would be willing to be a consultant for your veterinarian who doesn't know as much. And that may be one way you could be helped in that area. If you have a veterinarian that isn't strong with birds near you, but they're willing to be your attending veterinarian, maybe we can find an expert in birds that would consult them and help them out. Also, your relationship with your veterinarian is very important. In the mammal world, we look at it as they write your Bible. Okay, they can say that some regulations don't apply to you because you're doing this and this and this. This animal is acclimated to this environment or whatever. And we tend to not go against your attending veterinarian. They're your first line of defense. If you look at us as adversaries or not, but they're your first line of defense against us. If your vet says that, hey, this person, in your case, might say, privately, well, you probably know more than I do. I'm comfortable with you giving sub-Q fluids. I'm comfortable with you doing these things. Make sure that's in the program of veterinary care. And then we come in and we know that you're doing it. That's good husbandry. You're doing the things you need to do. But I hope that answered, but it's not a cookie cutter answer. It depends on circumstances. But for you, I would suggest let's have some conversations between now and licensing and see if we can find somebody who might be willing to help your veterinarian.
I'm gonna make a comment, y'all correct me if I'm wrong. So a hypothetical example would be Dr. Club is your attending veterinarian. So Dr. Club's in Tallahassee, I'm in Virginia, you might be in Tampa. So she writes the care plan, but you can use other veterinarians. So I'm in Virginia, Dr. Club is my attending veterinarian. She may send a tech out to visit my place. She may get one of my local vets to come visit, but she'll work with your local vets. And my vet that I use the most in Virginia will be my attending veterinarian if I want her to be. But my vet also calls Dr. Club, Dr. McDonald, others to consult and all. Recently, we had something on the weekend and we needed something, and she's calling the veterinary clinics that are within 10 minutes of us trying to get them to let me come pick up something so I didn't have to drive to her place. So, and then another comment, and I made it to some of y'all, you hire the attending veterinarian. You can fire the attending veterinarian. Attending veterinarian can also quit. So anyway, remember that in the zoo world, there are attending veterinarians that are livestock vets. And livestock vets are good vets because they're always on the move. It's easy for them to come by twice a year because some of them don't even have offices. So correct me if I'm wrong on that.
No, that's all right. So, but I just want to, I'll add a couple more points to that. So we want you guys to get the best veterinary advice possible out there, okay? And so just like you said, for getting a consultant attending vet, they don't have to live in the same state. But as long as they're okay with them having a local vet coming to be their kind of eyes and ears on the ground, that's great to do those site visits. There's also, you can do telemedicine as well. And so as long as your attending vet is okay with that, they can say, hey, you know, if you have an issue with your bird, they may be out in California, hey, this is what's going on, and they can give you the proper advice on that. But the thing I do want to make sure I warn you guys about, make sure though, all the information that's, you know, that kind of local vet is doing, get back to your attending vet. That's paramount. So that they are, because they are ultimately the ones going to be making those decisions and have the authority to say, hey, this is what's appropriate, this is right. And if they don't have all that information, then they don't have the appropriate authority at your facility to do that.
So I know, and probably a lot of people in this room have this situation where they've had a vet tell them, okay, you frequently get this problem. I'll give you 100 pills of the antibiotic because I know you know when to use it. If you is something on the veterinary care plan going to have to say, the vet has authorized me to keep, you know, a bottle of this antibiotic, a bottle of this anti-inflammatory, a bottle of this, and to use it in conjunction with, you know, my experience or what my conversation, and you want that listed on the veterinary care plan. If you come and you open the cabinet and you see, oh, there's a bottle of ciprofloxacin, it needs to be saying, I've been authorized to have this 100 pills of ciprofloxacin.
Take this. This is a common thing we see.
Yes, that would be ideal. Actually, in the portion that Dr. Napoli showed you in the first page of the program of veterinary care, there's some notes, a block for notes. That would be ideal if your vet can actually exactly write that there. And basically that's also then included in your program of veterinary care. And so that will be ideal, because when we go and do your inspections, we're going to be looking for that. If we open your if we ask you to open your medicine cabinet, so there's these drugs, we're gonna look, oh, so if they're there, were they approved by your attending veterinarian? So that we're gonna be looking for that. Make sure also, if you're gonna have approved medications, that they are not expired, because if they're expired, then, you know, we might have to go and look a little bit deeper into that, calling your attending vet, why is this, why is that? So yeah, we're looking for expiration dates as well. And just to mention the previous lecture, which I loved, but if you guys are gonna do like something like a oral synthesis, make sure that that's actually written there, because that's a medical surgical procedure, which needs to be monitored by a licensed veterinarian in whatever you are. So just some comments there.
Remember, vet care should really be kind of a CYA kind of thing. And that's the problem we see is, hey, with having like medication that's not on the program of vet care, it's like, oh, the attending vet prescribed this for, let's say, an eye ointment. And then, hey, you can use it for eye ointment. But then, you know, 6 months from now, oh, that person thought, oh, they can also use it for a wound on the wing. Well, if we go call the attending vet and say, hey, you're using this drug for this wound care, the attending vet might say, hey, I'm not comfortable with that. That's not appropriate. It should not be used. It should only be used on eyes. That could potentially be, most likely would be a non-compliance.
My question would be like, how USDA is going to be communicating this to the vets? Are they going to be backing us up and telling them, hey, we're going to be implementing this now for the bird breeders? So we would like you guys to see and work with this kind of community, because I have a similar situation as here. I got a bird accident. I communicate with 17 vets here locally. None of them want to attend me. And I went to an exotic emergency one and nothing happened. It's gonna be kind of very hard about how they're gonna be backing us up and wanting to come to work with us. So I don't know how USDA is gonna be doing like the NPIP, that they send somebody actually by the state to your house. It would be a good idea, or if they're gonna be telling the actual vets, this is gonna be now implemented, you guys have to do it too.
Let me ask you guys, is that something that the industry could help fix?
Yeah, I was gonna mention. Perfect jump right.
advantage that when I went in to interview vets, I know it's for dogs and all this stuff, but you guys have to let them know. You're actually giving them business. Because if you're attending, you're asking your customers, this is my vet. You could actually tell them, this is my vet. So you're actually giving business to this vet. My vet has had, what, about 800, we've been in business for 10 years. So I'm serious. He actually sent me a huge basket in Christmas because I gave him in 1 year about 400 people or more because they take. So it's good to have a vet in your hands because when you go and interview them, let them know you're actually getting business from, because these people don't only have birds, they have dogs, they have pets, so you're gonna take them business. So that's where we get our vision. And I have fired too.
Yeah. That is, you're right. You're the one giving money for their services. So this would be an area, though, I would like to see industry work with, like the Association of Avian Vets. Is there a call list or something that Dr. Club could, help facilitate to see if there's some way to bridge that gap?
She even has mentioned she's privileged to have a new one come on, but it's extremely hard to find. They do not even want. They prefer doing cat and dogs. That's the situation for most breeders around the world.
I just want to say with the finding a avian vet to come out there, like bringing a cat or a dog to a vet, they want to charge us so much more than when we bring a bird, and we get so much, we consult with so many different avian vets and we try to see who will come out, and they don't seem to want to charge us as much, and they charge us more for an armored dog. They don't seem to respect it as a practice, even if they are avian vets, as far as making money off of it sometimes, it seems. And it's really hard to get them to take us seriously as breeders sometimes, even when we're big breeders, as, like, hey, we'd love to have someone to recommend when we sell babies too. It's like, hey, bring them to this, because whenever we sell birds, we have to talk to them about vets and all the horror stories to make sure that, like, they find somebody good around near them. Because with birds, it's just, it's sometimes it's worse bringing them to a vet than just dealing with it ourselves. Because we can take better care and, have been in the industry, and even with some avian vets, a lot of stuff just gets missed. So we tried to work with vets, we have these meetings and stuff. It's just, we have a really hard time working with vets or getting the vets to work with us.
And I'll add to that too, before I give you the mic back, Cody. This is a sticky point, and I think you're kind of getting a feel. Great that you're referring business to your vet. That all sounds wonderful, but honestly, most of our vets right now are swamped. They don't have time to take on new business. And your suggestion of getting this organization to work with AV, that's great, we do. Really, the solution to that problem is more avian vets, and that's not a problem that we can solve. So that is a big challenge. And this ties into the same point. I had the question earlier about what you said about what an attending veterinarian is. And you're saying somebody needs to be on site, make a visit. Frequency of that was a little bit mushy, right? We don't define it, so maybe not even once a year. You don't want to say, yeah, that's fine, but yeah.
The reason I don't want to say that is because, we have facilities that push it more than a year, and that's though you weaken your program of vet care. You weaken that relationship and that communication, and so you start getting closer and closer, right, to potentially being non-compliant. So I'm just, if it's not everything is in place there. So that's why I'm like, but we do not define. We'll never cite you if you do it every 2 years. We don't have a set frequency.
A comment? This is just a comment on that. Just a comment, you remember, the regulations, I can anticipate that probably it's not gonna require your vet to be board certified veterinarian in avian medicine. So it can be a regular veterinarian, DVM. So as long as that person is, familiar with the species that they're gonna be advising you to. So, but it doesn't have to be technically what you're calling an avian vet. It could be any regular veterinarian. So of course, Dr. Club, for example, that would be awesome. She could be the attendant veterinarian for everybody in a way, and then she can delegate those authorities to a local person, just to do those things. So just to keep that in mind. You doesn't have to be an avian vet board certified.
Well, and also another great thing about these regulations is it's drawing attention. I mean, they've been talking this all over in the bird world here. And so hopefully this will also stimulate more interest in the avian medicine world. So there are more avian vets, and there are more avian vets that are knowledgeable of this that will reach out and help you guys. We did get a question. Are telehealth visits okay? This is a great question. So not just like, hey, a one-time issue for bird. I'm assuming the question is those kind of scheduled visits, can that be done by like FaceTime? We talked about this, and we've actually had some experience with just doing virtual inspections during COVID. It's not the same thing. You don't get the sound, the smell. It just is not a full visit. And so doing a televisit would substitute for an actual in-person. Now, if the vet, you do your in-person visits, but then you want to do, every 6 months, do a televisit, that can happen, that's fine. But it still has to have this in-person, scheduled visit, okay?
Just a quick how-to. So I understand, the scavenger hunt for your attending veterinarian is going to be your biggest hurdle. But once you think you might have found someone, I just want to make sure everyone's aware of the resources that we do provide. On our website, we have, I'll just back up real quick so you can see. When you go to www.aphis.usda.gov/aphis/ again, just search animal care, okay, you'll find it. But again, along the left-hand side, we have a whole bunch of options to help navigate. For attending veterinarians, we of course have one that says attending veterinarians. There is a slideshow, there are tech notes, so that the person that you are going to be contracting with knows what they're signing up for, so that you can be fully aware of what your expectations are as a license holder, as well as that person that comes on board, or if you think someone might be interested in coming on board. So I just want to make sure you guys know that those resources are there. Again, at the bottom, there's like a quick FAQ, how to get in contact with us if there are attending veterinarians that might have questions on the USDA side. And again, at the bottom here at the page, again, I'd like just a PDF tech note and then an actual PDF copy of a presentation that was given, I think about a year or so ago, with a bunch of attending veterinarians for licensed and registered facilities that they were present to kind of participate and engage and ask questions. Those are up on the website as well. And I do want to say also, in terms of the shortage, that is one of those things that we've been wanting to encourage to try to get the blessing from our upper leaders for us to kind of go out also to our Florida State Board in our case and advocate for people to step forward and be the attending veterinarians, because I feel like there might be that a divide, a stigma, I don't know, a challenge of becoming a USDA animal care veterinarian. So we're trying on our own end to see if we can do more outreach. So we're working on it. It's a process. It's the government.
It's a great point. I mean, so when we go through vet school, they don't prepare us how to be a USDA attending vet at any facility. And so if you're a dog and cat vet, and so you go to attending a vet that says, hey, you want to be my attending vet at this my aviary? They'll be like, whoa, I don't even want to touch that. This website here, we made that, like Dr. Napoli said about a year ago, to really help bridge that. This is to keep, so it's not as scary. All the, general questions that they would, the frequently asked questions that they would have is all right there. It's to help them feel more comfortable signing on to be your attending vet.
Okay, so by February, we're going to be required to have a vet come out to our facility and inspect our facility. Now, there are hardly any avian vets. I can only think of 4 off the top of my head in the state of Florida. On top of that, only one that I know of that will even travel, and she's not taking new clients. So everybody's going to be SOL. Okay, the only vets that are traveling might be cow hoofstock vets. They're the only ones that are traveling, and they don't know anything about birds because that's the total other end of the spectrum. So you're requiring us to have something that's not available. Then what? You're going to appoint a vet for us?
Thank you. I can tell you from my daughter doing mobile veterinary livestock mainly for 2 years, she did everything, but mainly we are such in a shortage, especially in this area for livestock vets. If you find one, they will not come out and do avian. She's already discussed it with the few that she knows that go out and do it, and they're not going to touch it.
So the rule scheduled to come out February, there is going to be an implementation period. So you would not be required to come. Yeah. That will be in the final rule, the actual specific implementation period. So it would, you won't pass, you have to have an attending vet with a program of vet care. When that time comes, we're going to work with you. And then it's going to have to be on a one-on-one basis because, different parts of the country are going to have different shortages. Okay. Remember, we work with 3,000-4,000 exhibitors in the country. They all have to have attending vets. Okay. We don't know that yet until we have the threshold, right? So I did read all the comments.
This may kind of be pushed in the, if your vet or your avian vet is USDA certified, they have to be licensed in your state?
So keep in mind that USDA certified in terms of that title for veterinarians that are out there, those are mostly like for certificates and stuff. That's not us specifically. Feedback. That's not like for our requirements specifically. That's for like interstate travel, perhaps even import, export types of stuff. That's what your USDA certified means. That's USDA, but not our little family of USDA, just so you know. So, but again, if you want to have an attending veterinarian, that's in another state, that is okay. Was there more to that?
Okay, so you can have a vet. My question is kind of the opposite.
My question is kind of the opposite because I have a great avian vet who will not travel. But if I happen to know a traveling vet that comes from state to state to state, can that traveling vet come in, even though they're not licensed in my state? Can that traveling vet come in and be the inspector?
The answer would be yes. Again, so if your attending veterinarian is again in state X. Your traveling veterinarian who's willing to come to visit your facilities is in state Y. As long as attending veterinarian in state X communicates to veterinarian in state Y saying, I authorize you to do this for my license holder, blah, blah, blah. Document it, we're good to go. Not in your state, no. Oh, no, in terms of site visits, you know, it all depends on there'll be a need for medicine application. I mean, again, a site visit can mean a lot of things.
There's a vet in the Northwest, Dr. Scott, he's not allowed to come down here and do anything for us because he's not licensed in Florida. So aren't we restricted to vets in Florida then?
But in terms of a site visit, again, in terms of a site visit, if you're attending veterinarian, again, that's in whatever state you choose, authorizes that other veterinarian to go out and do those site visits, that's fine. Now, medicine and treatment, I mean, that might be something where you have to explore other options. Is that?
Yeah.
Dr. Scott is retiring supposedly in about a year.
Okay, well, Dr. Scott's one example, but if I can hopefully interpret, you're attending veterinarian for your license, the application for your USDA license does not have to be licensed in your state. But if you need treatment by law, you have to have a licensed veterinarian practicing veterinary medicine in your state. Right. Right.
So my question is,
You can get any vet to be your attending veterinarian, but anytime you need treatment by law, you have to use a licensed veterinarian in your state. So yeah. Right?
100%.
There we go. All right, let me get over here to carry on.
I'm just wondering what vet you're gonna get to sign off on your facility that doesn't travel from another state to see it.
Well, right, you need to have site visits. So let's follow this scenario a little bit. And let's say I have an attending veterinarian in Chicago and I'm in California and he's my attending vet for the purposes of my license. Can I rely on a site visit from somebody local in California that is not my, they're all nodding, yes. Right, but this, well, Wayne does, but we're talking to USDA. As long as it's agreed upon.
As long as your attending vet is okay and any information gets, as long as your attending vet is okay with that. And so he's delegating his authority to that local vet and all that. And then any information, pertinent information gets relayed back to your attending vet. That's perfectly fine. And remember, we do this all the time. I was a supervisor in Texas, right? We had a facility that had 5,000 sugar gliders down in the middle of West Texas, okay? And they had a great attending vet, but I think he passed away suddenly. And they were like, oh, what do? We have a lot of connections. We call the local, we can give them a list of the vets.
You're offering to help.
Yeah, we're from the government and we're here to help.
The worst thing you could say.
I have a question. As far as, now you had mentioned that there were random visits from USDA representatives to each facility. I am wondering how invasive that is. If I've got birds that are breeding and I have people come in, that's going to upset my breeding birds. Also, we saw a slide where totally normal for us bird people, where you see some baby birds and they're surrounded by poop. Are these people going to know birds and be able to say this is normal? Or are they going to say, oh, you have poor husbandry because your baby birds have poop in the box?
This is a great question. Before we move on to kind of, outside of vet care, was there anything else that we wanted to touch on first? But we will get to that because that's very important.
I belong to a small, almost non-existent bird club in Northern California. I know a lot of people that breed birds, and some of them are not very fluent in English. Most of them, I would say 90% of the people I know who fall under that first threshold that you mentioned have never even thought about getting a veterinarian or taking one of their birds to the vet. Birds are on a perch, and if they're sick, they die, and that's the end of it. And they continue to sell birds. My thought is, and I implemented a lot of programs of corporate wide in the company that I worked for 35 years. When we had something that was drastic and affected a lot of employees or a lot of customers, we piloted it and rolled it out in slow fashion so we could find out where the wrinkles were. Because what I hear today is that those of us that are breeding birds are in the details, into the grass. And you've worked at a high level, and you've worked at other species that may or may not totally be compatible with avian birds. You're going to find, I believe, that if it all comes down at once and everybody's got to fit the same mold, there's going to be an awful lot of discussion and a lot of confusion and probably a lot of lawsuits about it too. That it would be easier to set the threshold of compliance in a very high level with a schedule over a certain period of time, when it got lower and lower and lower to the point where the policy issues and the questions would get rolled out, solved and straightened out at a level like, for instance, I know Steve raises a lot of birds, and I visited several.
Don't tell him.
And I visited several aviaries. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I visited several aviaries in Miami when I was there a couple of years ago that had 1,000+ pairs of birds breeding. Those facilities have the financial capabilities and the organizational capabilities to implement things like this much easier than I do with my 5 pairs of blue fronts. The relative cost is probably not much different, and it's going to have a huge impact on my level of breeding. And all of those people that you see that don't have a fluent command of the English language, and second of all, have never been in a veterinarian's office or ever thought about being in the vet's office. Now, I know you're trying to improve the animal welfare. Yeah. My suggestion to you is, if you step it down, you're gonna solve some of these wrinkles at a high level, and then work down to the lower.
Okay, so it sounds like we're starting to move beyond the veterinary topic. Before you answer, and now you have 2 things to keep track of, right? Were there any more specific questions about veterinary care? No, I have one from online. In kind of understanding how this works. So we worked our way through the attending vet versus the on-site vet and all that. But what if your attending vet says, oh, Steve is super qualified and has done this for years, and I actually even trust him to make an incision in the bird, remove some foreign object, stitch it up. I mean, that's a veterinary procedure. I'm doing it on my own birds, and my vet is confident that I can do that. Is that something that's going to be allowed?
We have had some circumstances where, because of shortages and things like that, we had attending veterinarians who authorized like licensed vet techs, things like that. I would be very delicate and walk on eggshells on that topic and say, let's discuss it on a case by case basis. I'm sorry to say that. It's an unfortunate situation, and I can't give you a black and white on that. I'm sorry.
And it's such a significant welfare concern there. So we really do, like Kirsten said, like case by case basis. Really, what is, I mean, we have licensees who are also veterinarians. So it may be a different story. So we can't give you a cookie cutter answer to that, because that really needs to be evaluated. And there's such a huge potential for welfare concerns in that.
So my wife is not a cook, okay? But there's meals she makes fantastically. One of them is every Thanksgiving, she makes this amazing ham to go with it. She scores it, puts the cloves in there and bakes it, and it's just absolutely delicious. So one year, we invited her father-in-law. Her mother had recently passed, and we're going to give him a good season. He's going to get the same ham that his wife made. And my wife did what she always does. She picked up this big ham, and she always cut the end off. Okay, and then she scored it and put it in the pan. And every time I ever saw her do that, I would think, oh my God, that's such a beautiful piece of meat that we're just throwing away. Why are we doing that? So she made the ham, and we sat down to dinner, and we commented on it. And I asked out loud, you know, what do we do with that piece of meat? And her dad started laughing, you know, because my wife said, well, that's what my mom always did. And he said, well, she did that because the pan wasn't big enough. It's a true story. So my wife makes a wonderful ham, right? She saw her mother do it. Does she need to write a cookbook and teach other people how to make ham? Probably not. So, you know, when you're doing a procedure, you may be very capable of doing that, but there's some importance on the why are you doing this? It matters. The decisions you're making need to be incorporated into the procedure itself. You know, why is it being done? Understanding why you're doing things is important for us as veterinarians and animal advocates. So just understand why it's a case by case. There's some things that may be fine, and other things that, you know, I delivered my child. I'm a veterinarian. I just got in the way. And the doctor said, you're not going to get out of here, are you? And I said, no. And he let me. And so I got in there, was doing everything. And I'm going to tell you, I loved it. I was on cloud nine till the head popped out. And then I was like, whoa. What is that? So there are always circumstances where maybe you don't have time to get to that there. This thing needs to be done. There may be nobody available to come do that for you. And this is a life and death situation. And that may be something that needs to happen. But like everybody said, it's not a cookie cutter. It's always going to be case by case. And the answers to these very open-ended questions, it's always going to be, it depends. Okay.
All right, so quickly, because we had two other questions, right? We had one regarding poop in the nest and baby birds sitting on it, many birds nest in their own guano, things like that. We have another one about the rollout in general. So because we're going to keep going all afternoon, right? We'll try to give, I know it's hard, but short answers, concise, and see what we can get in.
So I think you had actually like several questions, right? About the training of the inspectors, about being available all the time.
That was George.
Oh.
The timing of the visits, as far as if you've got birds that are breeding, having strangers come traipsing through your facility is going to be upsetting to the birds if they don't know these people. And then the other was how species specific is the experience of the USDA inspectors. They're not chickens.
Yeah.
We don't work on chickens either. So two great questions. So about the timing. So we talk to the inspectors, talk to their facilities. We get hours of availability. When they call you up to do that pre-license call, part of that process is, hey, tell me about your facility. What's your best, times of the year? What is your hours of availability? And working with the inspectors, they understand that there's certain times, because it's difficult on everyone if they show up and you're not there, or you're too distracted, or they can't do certain parts of the inspection because of XYZ. So they're going to work with you and try to do the best schedule. Now, I'm not going to say they will never come. Sometimes if we get a complaint or we have to come out and see the facility, I mean, that's just, there's no way around that during a certain period of time. We're going to work with you, right? Our whole purpose is to improve welfare. And we all understand that if we go tromping around there during breeding season or with hatchlings, we're going to negatively impact welfare. Birds are going to die or get stressed out. So that is the last thing we ever want to do. So we're going to work with you. Maybe there's a way for us to look at the cage so that it doesn't impact them. Maybe you could take your phone and do a FaceTime while they're there on property and see that part of the aviary. There's just, that's the kind of questions when your inspector calls you up for this pre-license. Tell me what you're concerned about. Tell me times a year that would be really difficult to do an inspection. Tell me about, if I do have to do an inspection, ways that we can mitigate that stress. Okay? And about the guano. So in the proposed rule, we already addressed that. Like, we understand there's periods of time you're not going to be able to clean. You have a schedule, you put it in there when you last clean, and then when's your next expected. I don't want to get too specific because we got to wait to the final, but in the proposed rule, we allow for a delay in clean. Okay. Does that answer? Great.
George.
And then George, yours more like having an implementation period where you kind of like ramp up the heat of compliance almost. Is that kind of a way to?
Or decrease the threshold of being under the regulations so that you can work out the details and with people who are large breeders and can easily hire people and do this and then figure out what's going to happen the next time you go down to somebody with less birds and then less birds.
Raise the de minimis.
Yeah, and because
I guess
I
by
rolled out
default,
corporate.
that's kind of how it's gonna go anyways, right?
I mean, we got a lot of comments about threshold. We got also even the exact same suggestions and comments about looking at having an implementation where you do the large and then slowly go to the smaller. We got all, like, we are looking at that. So that's a great comment, great suggestion.
Yeah.
I think you in the back was.
So on that same vein,
Right.
Gosh, I think it was probably 20 years ago. I attended the AFA convention here in Tampa. And at the time they were talking about the USDA and implementing all these rules. And at the time, one of the biggest considerations was you don't have the inspectors. You don't have them for the facilities that you've already been inspecting. How many new inspectors is it gonna take you guys to try and implement all this stuff?
It's a great question. It's a question we've been asking ourselves. I mean, it depends. It's going to depend on ultimately a couple things, right? Thresholds. No one knows how many licensed facilities we're going to get until we establish thresholds. Okay. So second, it's Congress. How much funding? We can't just say, hey, we're going to hire 100 new inspectors. We have to wait for Congress to say, okay, you get X amount of dollars. Yeah, no comment.
okay, so when it's implemented, how do we change it from then on? Does everything have to be a lawsuit in order to change any of this? Or it's complete after February? Yeah, maybe it's a question for David. Does everything have to be now a lawsuit that we have to spend money to change absolutely anything in this?
That answer requires a donation. No, Cody, you don't want to answer this question?
Hey, I'm not a lawyer.
Look, I'm gonna give them the benefit of the doubt. We'll see what happens come February. I'm gonna tell you my, since I'm up here with the mic, I might as well tell you my concern. You guys have been announcing, it seems like there's gonna be some significant changes to the proposed rule. Are you guys not considering doing a second comment period? Because this sounds like it needs a second comment period.
That's above us.
That's, yeah.
You should tell the lawyer that the other lawyer says they need a second comment period.
We're all about taking this feedback. We'll take it back. I mean, that's.
Look, we may need to litigate against them, and we're not gonna be litigating against you guys. We're gonna be litigating against your bosses. So don't be mad at them. But also, you know, if it comes out that there's in a year, we see that something in these regulations are working that neither us nor them realize was wrong, there is a petition provision in the APA that says we can ask them to change it. And you know, we don't necessarily have to sue them if something in this doesn't work out for us. But you know, I'm the lawyer and I get paid when we sue, so. You know.
What about like years down? Like, can't Congress make changes or?
So.
Yes.
I guess it's constitutional law day. Feels weird telling this is the government employee. No, Congress gives you guiding principles. That's how it says you have to regulate birds. It's your guys to put the regulations. So it's rare that Congress comes out and says, we're changing this one regulation. In theory, it's possible, but our current Congress gets nothing done. So I wouldn't see it happen. I actually have a question for you. If you don't mind, let me.
Okay, Clyde has one too. Thank you, sir.
I've got a couple questions since my speech directed at me to ask you guys. And I brought it up in my speech. Are you guys going to be requiring double enclosures, or are you just requiring a escape system? So
I'm not gonna be able to talk about standards. I mean,
well, that's not a standard. That's going to be either you need double enclosures or you don't need double enclosures.
It will be a regulation that depends on what the final rule is. I can't say.
So Wayne just asked that exact question.
Yeah, because I mean, just feedback for you guys. Just like there's a lot of people who have cages that meet the battery standard that I'm concerned about. There's a lot of people in California, there's a lot of people in Texas, and there's a lot of people in Florida, everyone in Florida that does not have double enclosures. And double enclosures is not a, 3-week fix. That's a year's fix.
I can tell you that this was a commented thing, and we addressed it in the final rule.
Okay. Buddy.
So we're an NPIP facility and we get inspected. It's more of a avian influenza check and farm typhoid check every year. Our inspectors are required, if they have a farm visit, not to inspect a commercial poultry operation for 2 days after. What are you guys doing what are you planning on doing for your inspections? Is that going to be something that you're going to consider?
That's a great question.
So if there's an outbreak or anything happening at your facility, how's that going to impact the inspection? Is that kind of what you're asking?
Biosecurity, like between.
All right, so biosecurity between facility to facility. Great question. We deal with that every day. We go to BSL for the highest biosecurity facilities, and we're going to always, and this is actually one of my topics I'm going to ask you guys, is ask you what your biosecurity is, and we're going to follow it to the T, whether it be a foot bath, whether it be put on shoe booties.
It's all exaggerating, but saying that just to say, hey, I'm going to keep inspectors out. It's a lockdown, I guess that's the water ball, and water ball is, barrier of influenza. I don't want to put any unnecessary risk at my facility.
I understand that, and that is something that I would say, hey, it's going to depend on the facility. You talk to the inspector and say, okay, how can we get eye to eye on this? But again, welfare is 100% our number one goal. We do not want to track anything from your facility to another's or vice versa. So we're going to follow your biosecurity, okay? But it's going to be dependent on the location, what's going on, your facility, the birds, all that.
David Lee. The answer to your question about Congress and all, I've been told this for years. I've been told by people from Washington what we do. And this is why I asked how many new inspectors they're going to hire. And Dr. Yager said the other day that they hadn't had any appropriations. You go to when the Senate or the Congressional Appropriation Committees are meeting, we go to them and tell them to defund it. So they're not getting any money. So we go in there and talk somebody into taking $10 million out of their budget And they hold their hands in there and say, well, we can't inspect bird facilities, sugar gather facilities, hedgehogs and all because they just took this money out. But to do that, we might need help with lobbyists and all. That was a comment, but then I had a question. Okay, I love putting people on the spot, but anyway, Dr. Yager, you and I had a private conversation and you said you're not gonna, y'all listen up here, please. Target bird fanciers that exhibit. So we're talking about people that show finches and cockatiels and all. This is the biggest segment of aviculture. They're meeting next weekend and they're having the National Bird Show. It's equivalent to Westminster. There'll be 500 to 1,000 exhibitors there. There'll be 2,000 to 5,000 birds there. And you said you're not targeting them. How do you differentiate that facility, or that's strictly somebody that goes and shows birds, from fancy birds as exhibitor, not like exhibitor like a zoo or free flight? How are you going to separate them from me that got a few pairs of macaws? How are we going to separate? And
It's the same thing we keep discussing. Again, it's about whatever that threshold will be, whether you're in or out, whether you're going to need a license or not. And I think we keep talking about the same topic. Am I missing something?
Well, and it goes on to what the definition of an exhibitor, okay, right? Commerce, affecting commerce, but like for dogs and cats shows are not covered. They're exempt. So we have to wait for the final rule to see. Now in the proposed rule, it talked about pigeon shows, fancier shows being exempt. Okay. So, wait, individuals like exhibit, like you're talking about exhibiting those animals or for the breeding aspect?
I'm talking about Gary Morgan, the president of National Bird Club. Let's use him as an example. Bird show. What makes him different as he exhibits from me that doesn't exhibit? Yeah, but all of these people that show are breeders. Just about like most of the different activities.
Yeah, the breeder. You're talking about the breeding activity or the breeding activity?
They got more than 4 females. They got more than 500. And let's say that the threshold's moved up to 20 and it's moved up to 5,000. A lot of these fancy bird people are going to fit in that category, but they're not. They're doing it as a hobby just to enjoy.
But I think you're confusing. It's like, when we talked about what's going to be exempt for those shows, that show activity, bringing the bird. But if they're breeding and selling those are covered sales if it meets the threshold.
Where do you think you get the birds from?
Yes.
Yeah. And those potentially could be covered, but the show itself would. Okay.
The first day I got free, understood.
Right.
You can have 20,000 pigeons to do a pigeon show. And it's not.
So if we're just talking about breeding, then there's no difference between that versus.
What I'm saying, that's the largest
segment of breeders, and y'all haven't talked to them. And I'm bringing this up because somebody said y'all want to talk to other organizations. That is the biggest organization. And I've talked to the people, the show people to the blue in the face, and they're saying they're not going to inspect us. And maybe somebody needs to go to Tulsa next weekend.
Maybe it's
give us a contact.
If you're showing your birds, dude, then you'll be
that's what I'm getting at.
If you just like me so much, you want others to like have to deal with me. I see.
If
you gotta show birds to be exempted. We're going to show next week. We're going to be in Tulsa, and they're going to have blue-throated macaws and scarlet macaws there.
Yeah, the show will be exempted, but if you do anything else like breed and sell, yeah, that doesn't get the nice loophole you tried.
So if the show is exempt, and that's like the facility and the people who make up the, whoever puts on the show, are you also saying under that the exhibitors are exempt. And no one's going to come from the USDA and be like, okay, you clearly are showing you have 20 pairs of something. Are you then gonna want to inspect that person that you have found? I think the idea is all of us have seen people like Fish and Wildlife come to shows and catch people at the shows that are not licensed and all that kind of thing. I think that's also a concern. We've been burnt, let's put it that way.
Before I hand you the mic to answer that, we are running out of time, so you can answer that, but I gotta cut off questions at that point. Or if you have any additional comments you want to clear up, that's fine. So go ahead.
I mean, it's a great question. I mean,
It's like a state fair.
yeah, we may show up to that. I mean, I think it may be an outreach, it may be saying, okay, who's out there? That's, I mean, the show itself is not covered. If you're selling, that could be even a retail sale, if it's face-to-face transaction, you're selling to the end user and all. So, I mean, that, but are you just concerned that we would? That you, you just say you're worried about us doing our job, and don't you want us, if you guys are gonna get licensed, right? You guys are reputable breeders, you wanna get licensed. Shouldn't the person down the street have to abide by the same rule as you do? Isn't that elevate the industry as well? I mean, yeah, part of our job is to look for covered activity without a license. So, is that, guys, I can't believe you guys keep wanting to hear from me. I'm honored, flattered, great questions, keep them coming. This is not the end of the questions. Well, I'm gonna be around for a long time. So keep asking them. We're gonna keep probably having these discussions, maybe even virtual ones down the road, depending on these roll out. I do want to get ideas from you when these regs get out. What's the best way to get the message out? Get all these questions answered. I know it's always a little aggravating bleeding. The inspectors ask the same thing of me all the time. Well, what does the reg say? What does this say? I don't know. I don't know until the final rule comes out. Then we can have a little bit more real, more detailed instructions and about the regs and all that. Okay? Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Cody.
See, my biggest concern is what you said. The thing is, I'm glad, but the thing is,
About a 10-minute break. There's some cookies and things coming in to follow up your pizza for lunch. We only do health food here. So hang tight and we'll get started with our afternoon presentations. Thanks.
I don't have to, which to me, I mean, I love it, but it's also bad because there are people not doing good that are doing things like that. And those are the ones, if one has to be regulated, they all. That's my feelings, you know, with all laws. If one person has a law, you should have a law. You should